So, back in 2020, when the world was in desperate need of a solution, this incredible technology called mRNA really stepped into the spotlight. And right at the center of this whole story, you've got two German biotech pioneers, BioNTech and CureVac. Now, they both started with pretty similar tech, but as we'll see, they ended up on completely opposite sides of history. Let's get right into this high-stakes strategic race. So that's the big question we're tackling here. How does this happen? You have two brilliant companies, both leaders in their field. So why did BioNTech, along with Pfizer, create a vaccine that literally changed the world, while CureVac's efforts just didn't make it? Well, the answer comes down to a handful of critical, high-stakes bets they made under unbelievable pressure. And for anyone studying entrepreneurial strategy, this is a perfect case study. All right, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we need to understand the mRNA revolution itself. Then, we'll get to know our two German pioneers and really dig into the three crucial and very different bets they made. We're talking technology, partnerships, and clinical trials. And finally, we'll look at the final verdict, the results, and figure out what it all teaches us about making strategic decisions in a crisis. Okay, so before we can really talk about the race, we have to understand the racetrack itself. Messenger RNA wasn't some overnight success story. Not at all. It was a technology platform built on decades of hard scientific work, a lot of dead ends, and just sheer persistence. So what is this stuff anyway? Well, the simplest way to think about it is that mRNA is kind of like a software update for your cells. It's not changing your DNA, it's just delivering a temporary set of instructions. In this case, the instructions were basically, hey, build this little harmless piece of the coronavirus, the spike protein, so our immune system can get a good look at it and learn how to fight the real thing. Now, what's just incredible when you look at this timeline is the sheer amount of time this all took. I mean, it was discovered way back in the 60s, and they figured out how to make it in the lab in the 80s. But for most of the 90s, the scientific community just thought it was way too tricky, too unstable, and too expensive to ever work as a drug. It really wasn't until a huge breakthrough in 2005 that the modern era of mRNA really even began. And this quote, I mean, it just perfectly captures that skepticism. You've got Matt Winkler, who founded one of the very first RNA companies, and even he's saying it was a laughable idea. You know, the thought of injecting something so fragile into a person, it just seemed absurd. And that context is so important because it shows the massive entrepreneurial risk that these companies were built on. It's a classic case of betting on a disruptive technology when pretty much everyone else is saying it can't be done. So, with that high-risk, high-reward background in mind, let's finally meet our two main players, both based in Germany, both chasing the exact same dream, but as you'll see, with fundamentally different ideas about how to get there. Okay, so this table right here, this is where it all starts. These weren't just small technical choices. These were deep, foundational, strategic commitments that really set them on two completely different paths. You've got CureVac, the older company, betting on unmodified mRNA. Their whole play was basically about cost and efficiency. Keep the tech simple so you can make a ton of it. On the other hand, BioNTech went for a differentiation strategy. They used a more complex, modified mRNA because they were chasing superior performance. These were architectural choices that would end up dictating every single decision they made from here on out. So when COVID-19 hits, these foundational philosophies were put to the ultimate test. Each company had to make three critical bets on how they were going to get their technology to market in a crazy race against the clock. The first bet was on their core technology. BioNTech went all in on performance. They believed that in a global pandemic, only the absolute best, the highest possible efficacy, was going to win. CureVac made a more calculated bet. They thought good enough would be, well, good enough, especially if their simpler method meant they could make more doses faster. It's a classic strategic trade-off, right? Premium performance versus manufacturability and cost. All right, bet number 2 was all about collaboration. BioNTech took one look at the situation and knew they didn't have the global infrastructure for massive trials, manufacturing, and distribution. So they very quickly partnered up with Pfizer, a pharma giant that had all of that. CureVac? They chose independence. They wanted to control their own destiny, keep more of the value for themselves. A really high-risk, high-reward strategy, because it meant giving up all the immediate resources a partner like Pfizer could bring to the table. And the final bet, this one came down to the clinical trial design. Following their tech choice, BioNTech went with a relatively high dose of 30 micrograms. They were betting on a knockout punch, something that would guarantee sky-high efficacy numbers. CureVac, on the other hand, was worried that their unmodified mRNA might cause more side effects at higher doses, so they went with a much lower 12 microgram dose. Their bet was on a vaccine that wasn't just effective enough, but also super tolerable and easier to produce in massive quantities.
So, there you have it. 3 distinct strategies, 3 massive bets, all made under insane uncertainty. Now, let's look at the results. How did these bets actually pay off when the clinical data finally came in?
In November of 2020, BioNTech and Pfizer announced their results, and the number they shared just stunned the entire world, an incredible 95% efficacy. I mean, this blew away even the most optimistic predictions. Their huge bet on maximum performance had paid off, big time. Then, 7 months later, in June 2021, it was CureVac's turn, and the results? A deeply disappointing 48% efficacy. Now, while it did show some protection, it just fell way short of the bar that had been set by their competitors and way short of what regulators were looking for. Their bet had failed. So why such a massive difference? Well, it turns out that in a global crisis, with governments being the main buyers, the market wasn't really interested in trade-offs. It became a winner-take-all game where only the absolute best performance mattered. BioNTech's bet on differentiation and a high-dose, maximum efficacy product proved to be exactly the right call for that specific market. And the consequences were immediate and just dramatic. BioNTech and Pfizer scaled to supply the entire world. CureVac had to pull the plug on their main candidate and completely pivot their strategy. And in a final, really telling chapter to this whole story, BioNTech, the winner, ultimately moved to acquire its rival CureVac. So the crucial takeaway here is simple, but it is so powerful. CureVac's strategy, prioritizing efficiency and scalability, it was perfectly rational, but they were betting on a market that just never materialized. When uncertainty is sky high and the stakes are literally life and death, the market rewards definitive, superior performance. Good enough just wasn't good enough. And this leaves all of us with a really critical strategic question, one for any entrepreneur or innovator out there. In a new and uncertain market, what do you optimize for? Do you race to be the first one out the gate? Do you engineer everything to be the cheapest and most scalable? Or, as BioNTech's story suggests, do you bet everything you have on being undeniably, without a doubt, the best? It's a choice that can make all the difference, and one you'll very likely face in your own ventures.